Chase is closing more credit card accounts permanently without warning in the last 30 days. Now, let's say you saved up thousands of Ultimate Rewards points that you were going to use for a bucket list trip, later this year. But when you go to swipe your Sapphire Preferred card, it gets auto declined. You call up Chase and they say all three of your Chase credit cards have been canceled, but they won't tell you why. They just tell you to wait until you get a letter in the mail and that you only have days to use your points before you lose them forever. You start panicking and thinking about how you can use the points and begging them to reinstate your account, but there's nothing they can do. Banks like Chase have the right to close your accounts whenever and for whatever reason without any prior notice. It's scary, right? So soon you'll see how these recent shutdowns led to more than 10 Chase credit cards wiped out, over 358,000 Ultimate Rewards points lost, and more than 10 hours wasted on the phone with customer service that had no answers for them. And it's wild because people with perfect payment history, huge balances paid off, and even Chase private clients are waking up to find every single one of their cards shut down overnight. Now, for this first case, it's just an example of how paying early kind of looks like fraud. All it took was one $40,000 inventory purchase to bring everything crashing down. So a business owner with a $35,000 business card put $30,000 on the line and paid it off immediately, and then tried to run the rest of the charges through. So instead of freeing up their limit, Chase froze the account. Available credit dropped to zero. Every single swipe flagged as fraud. 10 phone calls later, nothing was fixed. And the owner's own words said it all. They said, "Please, for the love of all that is holy, do not use Chase for any business accounts. I have never seen nor have had an issue with Amex." And there's another case. So one day, this longtime Chase customer logged in and saw every single card was closed. No warning, no reason, just a wall of accounts closed notices. Their setup looked bulletproof. They had multiple personal and business cards, carefully managed to be under 524. They'd even used a brand new Ink Cash to cover an Airbnb for a friend's bachelor party, hitting a sign-up bonus in the process. But here's the fallout. They lost their entire Chase ecosystem. I'm talking co-branded cards, transferable points, all of it. As they even put it in disbelief, they said, "So this sucks. Every one of my cards have been closed." Called immediately and spoke to two reps. Both couldn't tell me anything and said, "Wait for the letter." And there's another case where they said four cards gone, along with over 350,000 Ultimate Rewards points built up over 5 years. And this wasn't just any customer, this was a Chase private client with a flawless record. The rep on the phone had nothing more than "the decision is final. You receive a letter in the mail." And I say if Chase is willing to cut off someone at the very top tier, what chance does everyone else have? And there's another young Chase user that thought they were building the perfect foundation with their first big boy card, the Chase Sapphire Preferred. Everyday spend, paid responsibly, and even their mom added as an authorized user who was abroad. Then one random Friday, their card disappeared from Apple Pay, but logging in showed the truth. It was closed, and the letter followed with two kind of vague reasons. One was not enough credit information, and then the other was too many credit reviews. Now, the irony is they only had one inquiry, which was the Chase Sapphire Preferred itself. So in the end, they lost about 8,000 Ultimate Rewards points, and they were kind of left rattled. How could so little be enough to trigger a shutdown? Then there's the e-commerce owner that thought they were doing everything right. Bigger inventory orders were rolling in, and with them, bigger card charges. To stay on top of it, they paid off their balances immediately, sometimes even before the statement even cut. But then, just like that, without warning, the hammer dropped. All Chase cards closed, no explanation again, just locked out, forced back to Amex, and then months later, every reapplication they did was still denied despite having a great credit profile and history. Now, with all that being said, I would say overall, banks are getting stricter. I'm seeing this firsthand right now. Approvals that used to come back with 20K to 30K starting limits are now coming in at $1,000 to $3,000. Business term loans that used to let you make monthly repayments are now being structured with weekly or even daily repayment schedules, making cash flow management tougher than ever. And more people are emailing me about surprise credit limit decreases, sometimes even up to 90% overnight cuts, even when they've been paying on time and doing everything right. And you might say, That's just my personal take. And those stories are just a small part of the kind of broad Chase customer base. But here's the thing, the data actually backs it up. In the Federal Reserve's July 2025 Senior Loan Officer Opinion Survey, banks admitted what a lot of us have been feeling. They're tightening the purse strings on credit cards. They're raising the bar with stricter requirements, higher minimum credit scores, and smaller credit limits. Now, think about it for a second. Even if you got great credit, you're walking into a tougher room altogether. Banks are handing out less money and they're quicker to pull back if something looks off. And these numbers make it even clearer. So in Q2 of 2025, about 5.6% of banks said they were tightening standards on credit cards and loans. By Q3, that number jumps to 10.4%. That may not sound massive on the surface, but direction matters and momentum matters. When banks get more risk averse, it doesn't usually reverse overnight. It kind of trickles down into those lower limits and fewer approvals and harsher shutdowns. Now, when you look at these stories side by side, Chase's logic starts to make more sense. Here's what likely triggered the shutdowns and what you can do differently to avoid landing in the same spot. First is credit cycling or throughput gaming. So one business owner split a 40K purchase on a 35K card, paid down 30K instantly, and then tried to run the rest. Another person pushed large charges, paid them off immediately, and kept spending. So both were flagged almost instantly. So you got to know big charges, instant paydowns, and then more big charges in the same statement cycle to Chase. That looks like manufactured spending or liquidity risk. Even if you're just being responsible, their system reads it as gaming. So to fix this, you can let your statement cut before paying in full. And for unusually large purchases, you can call it in, for a temporary or permanent limit increase instead of trying to force extra volume through the same credit line. Another is new account velocity. So one customer had a long Chase history, but stacked a Bond Boy boundless and an Ink Cash close together, hit a sign-up bonus with that Airbnb stay, and then carried a 0% APR balance. The combination of too many accounts and a fresh balance likely tripped that risk alarm for Chase. So stacking approvals too close together, chasing back-to-back sign-up bonuses, and carrying that balance on that brand new card really creates a what I call a red flag combo. Chase sees that as aggressive and risky behavior sometimes. So to fix it, you can space out those new applications, especially if you're near the 524 line. And after you grab a sign-up bonus, put organic spend on the card for at least a few months before moving on. And avoid carrying balances in the first month of a new promo APR card. Another issue you might come across is ecosystem exposure. So for one user, losing multiple personal and business cards at once was devastating. And another Chase private client with that 350K points saved up saw all four cards closed in one sweep. So I'd say when all your eggs are in one basket, one misstep can wipe out everything. That's why people lost not just cards, but also their entire points balances overnight. So the fix is you want to diversify or spread your credit lines across at least two issuers and keep a backup checking account as your hub. Never let one bank own your financial life. Another issue is authorized user risk. One customer added their mom as an authorized user who was swiping overseas. That activity looked unusual inside of Chase's system. And for thinner profiles like him, even one mismatch in geography or device can trigger a shutdown. Banks watch authorized user activity closely. So if the user is overseas, swiping in new regions, or triggering IP address mismatches, it can look like fraud or abuse. So the fix is you want to be cautious with international authorized users. You want to pre-clear their location and merchants if possible too. The painful part is that most of these people weren't scheming. They thought they were playing it smart. But what looks like responsible behavior on our side can look like high risk to the bank's algorithms. But listen, I'm not going to lie. Seeing that account close notice is like missing a step on the stairs. 1 second you're on solid ground, the next your stomach drops into the air. Your points are in limbo, your bills are tied to cars that don't exist anymore, and you're left wondering if your credit score is about to take a nosedive. But the fact is, you can recover from this. So here's a step-by-step playbook to follow the moment they hit you with a shutdown. First, you want to secure your points. So if you've got Chase Ultimate Rewards points or any co-branded points for that matter, sitting in your account, your first instinct should be to move them out. Try to transfer them to a partner program or redeem them right away. Sometimes Chase freezes access to it, but it's worth trying because once they're gone, they're usually going to be gone forever. And then two, you want to stabilize your bills. Okay. So go through your auto pays, subscriptions, and wallets. If Netflix or your phone bill or your business software payments are linked to a closed card, you don't want to add insult to injury with late fees or service interruptions. So update those payment methods immediately. And then you want to call and escalate. So, yes, the frontline reps are usually reading off a script, but start there anyway. Get the official record of what they're telling you, then escalate to the executive office. This is where you want to be calm and factual. Have your documents ready, like your invoices, receipts, anything that can help explain your activity. And just know emotional venting won't move the needle, but clear evidence sometimes can. And you have to remember that the letter that you get in the mail is the truth source. So every shutdown comes with an adverse action letter. That's the bank's official reasoning. So you want to save it, study it, and pay attention to the language that they use. And listen, it's not always satisfying. Sometimes it's super vague, but it's the piece of paper you'll need if you decide to fight back. And here I would file complaints if needed. This is the next step. So if the shutdown is based on an obvious mistake like identity fraud or mix-ups, inaccurate negative data, or a credit report error, file that complaint with the CFPB. Hopefully, they'll pass it on to Chase and force a written response. You could take things a step further. You can also go to your state's commissioner of banks or your state's attorney general's office. These agencies can really apply more pressure. And sometimes the only way to get a bank to take a second look is when a regulator is CC'd on that email or on those letters. And then we talked about this. You want to rebuild elsewhere. This is the kind of the hardest pill to swallow for some people. Once Chase has made their decision, it's often final. That doesn't mean you're done. It just means it's time to rebuild. Rotate your spending to Amex, Capital One, US Bank, or a good credit union. That's probably the best move. So you want to diversify your relationships so no single bank has the power to freeze your entire financial setup. And I'd say give it at least a year before you try your luck with Chase again. But honestly, I really get it if you never want to do business with them after this. And for those of you who've never gone through this before, you're probably thinking, yeah, what if Chase shut me down tomorrow? Well, that's why you need more than one banking relationship. Can't stress that enough. And that's why I found over 80 pre-approved credit card offers for this year that are soft pull only. And check out the next video here to see two more cards that let you see your limit up front, which really gives you, full control of your next move. Thank you for watching.